From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And ahead for you today, an extended visit with K-State's Art Barnaby. Art will report on K-State's preliminary evaluation of the price support and risk management features of the new Farm Bill. He'll look at making the choice between the ARC and PLC program options, and he'll talk about subtle changes to the crop insurance program. Art also reflects on what he considers the most significant developments in the federal farm safety net provisions and crop insurance over his 39-year career at K-State as he's retiring at the end of this month. And K-State's Charlie Lee will take a look at a new study which adds to the evidence of why pen-raised game birds tend to struggle following their release into the wild. Right here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. Well, with the 2018 Farm Bill now in the books, it's to the sorting out what it means to you producers. And we've a team of agricultural economists here at Kansas State who have been diligently going after that here in the recent weeks. We brought one of them by today to share some thoughts. Art Barnaby, Risk Management Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, Art, you throw in the complication of the recent government shutdown, and the implementation of the new Farm Bill is bound to be delayed.
Yeah, that's the first problem. Obviously, they're not working on writing the regs and rules that have to be written and published and that sort of thing. I think a lot of people simply think, well, they passed Farm Bill, now we're ready to go. No, you got to have these regs and rules. That's part of the law that has to be implemented. That's done by USDA. The next step that has to happen, they have to develop software to actually implement this. On top of that, they've got this market facilitation payment, which they've said already they're going to give you an extra day for every business day that the USDA is closed. So that's going to start extending that, and of course nobody's working on that. The point is, the work is stacking up at your FSA office with them gone, and it's going to take them a while to dig out from under their desk to start something new,
in fact,
which is a new Farm Bill.
Without the shutdown, it was going to be a daunting task to implement this anyway with software writing and so forth.
I guess the only thing we can say is be nice to your FSA person because they're probably going to be a little grouchy when they get back, especially since they haven't been paid and their workload doesn't really go away. It's just stacking up.
That considered, though, you, along with colleagues Michael Taylor and Robin Reed, have been analyzing what is known about the Farm Bill and in particular the centerpiece of the price support mechanisms, the ARC and the PLC programs. There has been a modification there, and it really has allowed, as we go through the next several years, greater flexibility in enrolling.
Yeah, I want to be clear. What we've got here, and it's on agmanager.info, right now, when we put these together, this is our understanding reading the law. We normally would check the stuff that we have in this with the folks at FSA to see if they agree with us, if they think we got it right, even though until they've officially written all their rules and regs, they can't comment publicly. Having said that, we did run this by some folks in Washington to see if they think we're correct. But until the Secretary of Ag makes it official, it's not official. So with that in mind, that was enough weasel words, wasn't it? This is our best guess, but we might be wrong.
You're guessing as to what might be the best option for producers as they enroll for the next 2 years in this immediate sign-up and then annually afterward, right?
Yeah, some things are, in fact, clear, and I'll identify the ones that I think are in the gray area or subject to Secretary interpretation. Number one, you will again choose between ARC and PLC. The big difference this time is you're not signing up for 5 years. You're signing up for 2 years. It'll be for the 19 crop and the 20 crop, and that's marketing year 20/21, okay? The big change is that you're allowed to switch after those 2 years. If you start out in ARC, you can flip back to PLC and vice versa, and that's a pretty big change in my opinion. And then they're making some improvements that really apply to the ARC program. One, they've got a formula that goes through and can increase the reference price that determines the ARC guarantee. So it can be up as much as 15% higher than it currently is the case. We don't show a number going up that high, but we do show an increase on some of those prices. In our website, we've got all of the reference prices as we know them, along with the maximum price. We've got the maximum and the minimum, and we've also got the loan rates and et cetera. It's all there in one table for you to look at. Beyond the price, there's also provisions that will up the county yield number because they're going to, or at least for some crops, because they're instructed to do a trend yield adjustment on the yield, similar to what they do with crop insurance, which will make the county yield number higher, and along with the reference price being higher, it makes it more likely that you could collect. In addition to that, you're also allowed to update your program yield for the YP program. You were able to do that in 14. You're going to be able to do it again this time around, but it's a far more complicated program. When they get the software built at FSA, you'll just put your numbers in. If it's higher, you want to do it, and if it's not, you don't want to do it.
They'll cut right to the bottom.
It'll cut right to the bottom. But that's going to change different people's decision on whether to go PLC or ARC, because, if ARC gets a pretty big jump, especially in your county, because remember, these county yields are being trend adjusted, but that's based on your county. And some counties, depending on where their numbers came out over the last 5 years, and, of course, this trend is going to be over a longer period of time, then you will have some counties which will be better off with ARC, and others will be better off with PLC, especially if you have the ability to raise your PLC yield. So I don't know that's going to be a cut-and-dried answer for everybody. That, as we said last time around, it's a crapshoot. If you get really bad yields, you're going to wish you were in ARC. If you get really good yields and the price falls out of bed, you're going to wish you were in PLC. And none of that's changed. On this price side, we have been running through the numbers, and again, we'd be a lot more comfortable if we had somebody to confirm this with, but as we know, USDA is closed. But we're coming up with price in the first year to set the PLC for soybeans. That's the one we see the most likely, as still at $8.40, which is the reference price. That's the statute price. In other words, the price adjustment didn't do anything for that program. But for the ARC, we show it increasing the reference price used to calculate the guarantee for ARC, and we show that at $9.55, so that's $9.55 versus $8.40. Now, there is a deductible in the ARC, don't forget that, 14%. But on top of that, the ARC is getting this yield adjustment, too, through the trend adjustment, so you got to factor that into your decision. The point is, right now, our estimate, now this is not for the 19-20 year that you're going to get paid on, this is for the current program. The 18-19 thing, I've updated my estimate of the soybean price, and I'm at $8.82 right now. Another caveat, though, the last time I had an official number for USDA was in October. So I'm forecasting with a lot less information than normally I have to estimate these national average prices that determine payments. But at $8.82, that's a long ways from $8.40. I don't think we're going to be anywhere near $8.40, so there won't be any, if I'm correct, there won't be any PLC payments on this year's soybean crop at $8.40. And given the market kind of looks like it hanging around that $9 figure for soybeans, again, we're talking futures, not marketing average price. They're not the same thing. But we're hanging around that $9 number. It looks unrealistic that we're going to get something less than $8.40 national average price next year. And as a result, there would be no payment with the PLC program. That doesn't mean there's going to be a payment with ARC, but if you know one's not going to pay, you might as well throw the dice and take the other.
Right.
And unlike last time, you're not throwing the dice for 5 years. You're throwing it for 2. The other thing is they're going to use RMA data to set the yield numbers in the ARC. That's new, too. Is that going to fix the deal where I didn't get paid, but the guy who farms across the road from me got the maximum ARC payment?
You're thinking not.
Absolutely not. In fact, I'm absolutely certain it won't. What it will do is give a more accurate county yield for counties that have a large planting of a particular crop and a particular practice. In other words, they've got a lot of irrigated corn acres in that county, and it's all insured, or at least 80 to 90% of it's insured. In that case, they will have a very accurate number of what the county yield is, as opposed to a NAS number, which is a survey. Under the legislation, that is where they're supposed to start with setting the county yields. Now, the problem is when you get into a county, and we were talking earlier about Ellis County. I don't know if there's an irrigated cornfield in the entire county, but under the new rules, FSA has to put out a yield for both irrigated and non-irrigated. No longer will it be combined. It'll be either irrigated or non-irrigated. And so what do you do in a county that has very few irrigated corn acres? Well, they can go get a neighboring county data. They can use data from the district. Again, we're talking about NAS data at that point. They can use data from a representative farm. Representative farms are always tough to put together because they're somebody's estimate. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, if you don't have data, that's what you have to do. And so some of the complaints that you and I heard about ARC, they're still going to be there. But I will grant you that the number is going to be basically dead on in those counties that have large number of acres. A lot of counties, and particularly west of us here in Manhattan, have a lot of wheat acres in every county, and most of it, probably 80+% of it, is insured. So those are good, solid county yield numbers to work with. And there's no reason not to do them. Why use less accurate information? So this does make sense to me. Only thing I'm saying, while it makes sense to use the RMA data, it's not going to fix all the complaints that I heard in the past.
Right. Art, we need to break away for a couple of minutes. When we return with K-State's Art Barnaby, we'll take up how crop insurance fared out of the new Farm Bill. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Agriculture Today returns now, as does risk management specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Art Barnaby. We're thumbing through the high points of the 2018 Farm Bill pertaining to the producer safety net mechanisms within it. And we talked during the first part of our visit about ARC and PLC participation. But getting right into your wheelhouse, so to say, Art, that would be crop insurance. By and large, and as per farmer preference, status quo.
They basically left it alone, and that's exactly what farmers wanted. They was pretty vocal, both farmers, lenders. It was hard to find anybody that was upset with crop insurance. The only real criticism that you find in the conference report was they wanted a greater push on whole farm insurance or other types of coverage. They didn't really specify what it should be, that would encourage more acreage to be insured from hurricane losses. Crop insurance applies to wind damage, so it is covered, but in Florida, a lot of people didn't have crop insurance, or they only had the basic CAT contract, and they had the big hurricane, and of course we had a ad hoc disaster program. Thought we kind of got rid of those, but it turns out we haven't. Now, that doesn't mean we can't use the whole farm here in Kansas. Where I'd see it might have a possibility will be with livestock producers. And they were wanting to remove a lot of the limits. They have liability limits. You could only buy initially, I think, like $1 million worth of coverage. So now they want to lessen up, and basically at some point, I think where they're going is they would have no income or payment limits. It'd be like it is with the other crop insurance programs that simply removed all the requirements on being a small farm. So all of that to encourage it. They also want less paperwork. Now, remember, this is based off your tax return, so I don't know how you get to less paperwork. And apparently Congress doesn't either. They just told RMA to do it. Right. No problem for the person that doesn't have to do the job, right?
Right.
So then we moved on to the business in the House that they were wanting to shift money into the ARC program, and they were looking where to get the money of the ARC, primarily Corn Belt interest, wanted to move it into the ARC program. So they came up with this idea in the House that if you hadn't planted a program crop from 2009 to 17, you lost your base. Well, what came up right away was alfalfa. In fact, I was talking to a guy who was growing alfalfa on corn base, and I said, well, under the House rules, you just lost your base. You had a few words to say about that.
Sure.
But that got taken off the list of unacceptable crops pretty quick. Now you get into a lot of gray area. Or no, the next one's pretty plain. If those acres that have base from 9 through 17 have been allowed to revert back to grass and native grasses, et cetera, for haying and grazing, then you also lose base. But you're not going to lose the base. What you're going to do is have your base suspended. And because your base has been suspended, you will get a CSP, a Conservation Stewardship Program payment at $18 an acre. But what about things like triticale and brome grass? Brome grass in particular is kind of interesting to me because the brome grass is sort of managed similar to alfalfa. You don't, it's perennial. You don't have to plant it every year, but at some point you usually have to do something to help keep the stand established. And you, in the case of the brome grass, anyway, you have to put fertilizer on it. So that interpretation is going to be made by the secretary, and I don't know. We don't know which way that's going to go at this point. That's back to those rules and regs that have to be written. Those are really far more important than what people realize. But nobody's going to lose base this year. Conservation title, not many changes there other than going to add CRP acres, but they're going to reduce the rental rate, so it won't be quite as attractive as it used to be. The credit title, the amount that you can borrow from FSA operating loans went from $300,000 to $600,000. Guaranteed ownership loans, these are guaranteed through FSA on a bank, went from $700,000 to $1.75 million. And direct operating loans, and again, these would come through FSA offices, went from $300,000 to $400,000. So all they did is up the amount of credit that would be available. Of course, particularly when you apply for a loan with FSA, it's not a real simple process because they have to be approved and all that. It takes some time, and they're not open right now, so you're going to have to wait until it's done. So anyway, that's where we're at right now. Stay tuned. Michael and Robin will be coming with updates. Nothing is impossible for the person who doesn't have to do the duty.
Right. And on that note, to finish up here, as you've said, you are retiring after 40-some years at K-State. Is that the
39?
Pretty close.
The reason I'm retiring is because I didn't want a 40-year pin.
Okay. But on that occasion, and because you've been so instrumental, Art, most assuredly in the evolution of crop insurance, of farm program mechanisms over the years, I want to ask you to share your thoughts on what you consider the milestones within that realm over the last 39 years.
Well, I would rank the big policy changes in order, and crop insurance, to your surprise, is not the top of the list. Top of the list for me was freedom to farm. That was a major change in policy. Up to that point, if you had a wheat base, you had to plant wheat. If you had a corn base, you had to plant corn. And if the price was in the tank, you basically were going to have to plant it. Now, you got, at times, 25 to 30% of your income came from the government. The reality is, I think freedom to farm benefited Kansas more than it did the Corn Belt, because all of a sudden we got a lot of crops we didn't grow here when I started. Two come to mind real quick. Cotton, canola. Much easier to make the change to those crops because of freedom to farm, which allows you to plant based on market conditions, not on the requirement of a government program. Number two is the change to the futures contract, and of course I was really Me and Dan O'Brien spent a lot of time here at the end of my career dealing with non-convergence in the wheat market. To some extent, you're seeing some of that in the soybean market. As a result, there was a change made on the Kansas City wheat contract. They put in this variable storage rate. I don't think a lot of people really understand that, and it's very controversial. But the idea, and I think it does work, it drives up the storage rate, which they now call a premium. They can't call it a storage rate, but it's the same thing. They drive that up so the long who accepts delivery has the right to store that grain into that particular elevator that issued a shipping certificate. They used to issue a warehouse receipt. But that was the first big change, and it won't necessarily bring convergence right now. You may have to roll your futures contract forward, but each time you roll forward, if you're still not getting the incentive to converge, the storage rate goes up until at some point you're going to get that high enough that it will encourage it. Now, a lot of folks says, well, you and Dan are just making money for ADM. That's not true, because the truth is there's very few contracts ever delivered. And you probably don't even need any. You just need a credible threat that is going to be delivered, and you will get convergence. So I think people really misunderstand who really benefits from this VSR, and I think it's farmers. I really do, because their hedges are going to work the way they're supposed to at that point. Also, that affects your payout from crop insurance. When the price falls, and if it falls more, in other words, falls to where the market is, that's going to show up in any indemnity payment. So there's still some problems, and I wish I had another 10 years to work on them, but I really think they've made some improvements here, and they were significant because we're talking about the whole market worldwide, not just here in the U.S., and that's why I slipped it in front of crop insurance. The big change in crop insurance was in 1980. They shifted this from a government-run program to a private sector program. And what really changed is, at that point, if you're operating a government program, just like it is with the current ARC program, if you want it, you have to come in and sign up for it. Nobody's going to come out and call you at your farm or try to sell it to you, et cetera. Well, when they shifted to the private sector, now you've got a bunch of commission-driven agents that want to sell you a policy. And they're all going to were and still are, making sure you get every piece of paperwork in so they get their premium. If you don't get your coverage locked in, they don't get paid. Mm-hmm. So they got a big incentive. That's a whole different world. And the other thing is, when you had the private sector involved, then they started looking at it, well, the reason it's not selling is because it's not a very good product. That never occurred to anybody, that this doesn't really work. And it showed up big time in 1989, the big drought, the worst wheat crop we've ever had in the state of Kansas, half a yield the entire statewide, counties with near zero yields. And what happened to the deficiency payment? Well, you lost it. The price went up. You didn't have any bushels to sell, and crop insurance did not cover that loss. That harvest price, that's where the idea came from.
Mm-hmm. Well, we appreciate and have appreciated for some time your contributions for K-State Research and Extension, and for being a regular on this program to share the latest in risk management, farm programs, and the options available to producers. So as you embark on a well-deserved retirement, we wish you well, Art, and thank you for coming over. Art Barnaby, Risk Management Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. We'll be back with more on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and moving ahead now with today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Some state agricultural officials are urging the Trump administration and Congress to strike a deal to reopen the government, warning that the partial shutdown is having immediate and cascading effects on farmers and ranchers. The impacts of this shutdown are real, the words of New Mexico Secretary of Agriculture Jeff Witt, who is the president of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. He went on to say, quoting here, "Not only are farmers and ranchers unable to use a host of existing USDA programs they depend on, they also can't use important programs they need now from the recently enacted Farm Bill without them," he says. "The financial stress and challenges farmers are facing will keep accumulating." Of major concern to producers, of course, the shuttering of the Farm Service Agency. The county offices of the FSA have been closed since December the 28th. Adding to the conversation, North Dakota Agriculture Commissioner Doug Gehring, who said that some producers are dependent on FSA loans and it's vital that those are processed in a timely manner. The shutdown has also derailed implementation of the Farm Bill, including that new program crafted to help dairy farmers suffering from low prices. Dairy producers currently left without a safety net until the USDA reopens and revives the margin coverage program. That's according to the NASDAQ group. President Trump used his second appearance before the American Farm Bureau Federation annual meeting yesterday to sound what are becoming common themes for the White House, pushing the need for border security, including a barrier along the southern U.S. border, and the government shutdown, trade, and cutting down the level of regulation faced by agriculture and other industries. He made remarks that touted the gains in trade that are expected to be realized by U.S. agriculture via the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, noting that producers will be faced with a choice of how much to grow. He lauded the progress scored in that agreement for the access to the Canadian market for U.S. dairy products as an example of the benefits U.S. agriculture will see from the trade deal. He spent much of his time, however, focused on border security and said that the partial government shutdown was due to Democrats being unwilling to provide the $5.7 billion in funds for the border wall he has requested. Trump touted the actions to cut regulations on agriculture and other industries, such as replacing the Waters of the U.S. rule, telling producers that their ditches and more would not be subject to government regulation. He then returned to trade later in his remarks, telling the audience that the greatest harvest is yet to come, in his words. Well, informational opportunities for you dairy producers are coming up soon, hosted by Kansas State University. For more on that, we welcome to the Agriculture Today microphones for the first time, Britton Rucker. Britton.
Eric, this year's Dairy Days will be held in Whiteside on February 5th and Seneca on February 7th. Kansas Dairy Days is an annual event hosted by Kansas State University to provide new research findings and hot topics relevant to the industry. Speakers will give an update on research projects that were conducted last year at K-State, latest improvements in robotic milking, and programs related to risk management. Their sessions will include managing gut health for healthier cows and higher production. Should you consider fiber and starch digestibility when selecting silage hybrid? Using robots to milk cows, risk management options for dairy producers, and dairy beef crosses increased revenue. The Kansas Dairy Commission is sponsoring lunch at both meetings. Each meeting will begin at 9:45 a.m. and finishes at 3 p.m. People interested in attending are encouraged to pre-register. For the Seneca meeting, call 785-336-2184. For the Whiteside meeting, call 620-662-2371. For more information about K-State Dairy Days, including the schedule for both locations, is available online at asi.ksu.edu. For Agriculture Today, this has been Britton Rucker.
Thanks, Britton. And again, asi.ksu.edu for more information on that pair of dairy days soon to come up. That takes us right into this week's edition of Milk Lines with K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers, considering some of the challenges we're seeing as we try to feed the 2018 corn silage crop. Many of you harvested corn silage this past year that contained less starch than in a normal year. This was due to the drought that we had across much of the state. How serious is this? Well, in some cases, it's actually really serious. We've had some reports of corn silage samples coming back that contain less than 10% starch. Normally, corn silage would contain about 36 to 39% starch, and sometimes more, but a lot of the samples coming back this year are much, much less than that. Again, there's probably some concern that we have from a nutrition standpoint when we see starch levels that low in the corn silage. How big of a factor is this? Well, let's stop and think about this for a minute. If you were feeding 20 pounds of dry matter from corn silage, and that corn silage normally had 36% starch in it, that'd be about 7.2 pounds of starch. However, if it only contains 8% starch this year, that's only 1.6 pounds of starch, which means that your diet now lacks about 5.6 pounds of starch, or about the equivalent of 9 pounds of corn. Now, here's the concern we have. In a lot of our diets, we generally feed a lot of corn silage that has quite a bit of grain in it, and maybe about 8 to 10 pounds of corn grain in addition. However, with low-starch corn silage, you may need to add 18 to 19 pounds of corn to that same diet. So what does this mean for a dairy farmer? You need to be really working with your nutritionist. If you switch to the 2018 corn silage and you've seen a drop in milk production in your herd, this might be one of the areas that you need to address. One area that we can't change is the fiber digestibility of the crop. So in addition to being low in starch, it also has a lower fiber digestibility. Really can't do much about that. However, we can work with the nutritionist to try to increase the overall level of starch in the diet by feeding additional corn or other starch products. Another thing you might consider is the use of liquid feeds, particularly something like molasses or even whey, to provide some available sugar as well into the diet. This may help increase milk production as well as increasing the dry matter intake of the herd. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to carefully consider the impact of low-starch corn silage on their dairy herd.
Thanks, Mike. Quick reminder, if you'd like to pick up a podcast of our daily broadcast, it's as easy as going to this address, agtoday.net, agtoday.net. K-State's Charlie Lee will be in for his weekly stint next on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and alongside again to talk wildlife management with us is Research and Extension Wildlife Specialist at K-State, Charlie Lee. Charlie, we're going to take yet another look at an issue out there, raising game birds in a confined setting, in pens, if you will, and then releasing them into the environment. This is a concept that's been around for a while, purportedly to boost the populations and the hunting experience, right?
Yeah, the practice of captive rearing and releasing wildlife has been done with kind of 3 main purposes. One is to introduce animals into new unoccupied areas, or to restock animals in an area to supplement the existing population, or to reintroduce animals into an area in which they were and now have been extirpated. So those are the 3 primary purposes, and some of these captive rearing and release programs have met success. The programs for game birds have largely not been successful. But understanding the reasons why has been somewhat difficult to come up with concrete reasons that we can't successfully rear game birds and have them released. For example, we know that usually captive reared game birds fly much slower than wild raised birds. For instance, greater prairie chicken fly notably faster and greater distances than the captive-reared Atwater prairie chicken in Texas. And similarly, the captive-reared northern bobwhite quail fly slower and shorter distances than wild northern bobwhite quail.
And that's just one of the reasons you say why there are so many failures with these captive bird releases. Reproductive inefficiencies, part of that?
Well, reproductive inefficiencies would certainly play a role, and that would be primarily due to mammalian predators for animals that either get the hen as she's nesting, laying eggs, or take the clutch of eggs, or even prey on very small chicks. What we find with captive-reared birds is they seldom live long enough to successfully lay eggs and raise young chicks. The survival of them is very poor. Studies have shown only about 60% of those birds survive more than 1 week after release. At the 1 month time frame, less than 25% remain alive. And experts suggest survival over winter as less than 5%. I've seen estimates as low as 0% are going to survive winter, and I don't think there's any research that showed those captive-reared birds lasting more than one season. When you have normal wild-reared birds that lose about 40% of their population each year, you can see a few percent, as much as 5% that's surviving to the next year. That's certainly not enough to overcome the natural losses experienced by quail from other predators in the environment. We not only have the mammalian predators that impact nesting, we have raptors, hawks and owls that are going to take flying quail. Many hunters observe hawks in the wild and subsequently are concerned that hawks are taking an inordinate number of quail, and they certainly do take quail, but they take some other birds as well.
Well, to lend to the body of evidence on the troubles with releasing pen-raised birds in this manner, a study in Texas got right at that very thing, the impact of raptor predation on pen-raised birds.
Yeah, many hunters have seen a raptor take a quail on a wild quail flesh, or at least swoop down at the quail. The researchers in Texas decided to use falconry to help them determine whether raptors would select more for captive-reared birds or for wild release birds. So they instigated a study looking at live trapping wild-reared birds and then using cage-reared birds or pen-reared birds, launching those birds up from the same location while a trained falconer was in the area flying his bird, and seeing which of that pair, either the wild-reared or the captive-reared bird, the hawk would select for. They actually did two different studies. In the first study, they used a trained northern goshawk. That one pursued wild bobwhites following the covey flushes. They successfully captured a wild bobwhite in only 7% of the flushes. So they used a different bird, a Harris hawk, in the subsequent trial, where they were trying to determine whether the hawk would select for the captive-reared bird or the wild-reared bird, and 8 out of 10 tries, the captive bird was selected. Reasons for that are largely because that bird flies slower, flies shorter distances. Most likely it's probably a larger bird, so it's not going to be flying as fast. And that's part of the reason that these captive-reared birds don't do very well. If the hawks are successful only 7% of the time catching wild-released birds, and they're successful 80% of the time in collecting captive-reared birds, there's certainly a big discrepancy there in the way those birds fly. Now, survival is only one of the reasons we need to look at the problems associated with releasing captive-reared birds. There's other issues as well, but survival is the one that most hunters are interested in.
So it serves this study as just more confirmation that if we're looking at building up game bird numbers, that using pen-reared stock and releasing them into the wild just doesn't prove out to be a reliable method.
No, it's not a good technique. There's certainly some potential for harm. There's hope for low quail populations or game bird population, and that's really through habitat management.
Once again here, drawing from a study that was recently conducted in the state of Texas, and it looked at pen-raised quail in this instance and the preference for those pen-raised quail by raptors over the wild-released quail. And Charlie, we appreciate the look at this today. He is a wildlife specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Charlie Lee. So goes our Tuesday edition. As always, we thank you for being along with us. We'll return this same time tomorrow. Hope you will as well. Meantime, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.